welcome back. We're still considering the idea of lines and how we might control the appearance of these lines. But what this is about is how do we control this legend right now and not even show it, not need it. Right now, the problem is that we are violating our principle of proximity and separation. We have a legend and we're thinking like, oh, here's income, and I have to connect that income back down to this red line. And so my attention is being drawn away to make this connection. And what would be much better is if I just said income right at the end of this, and there was no need to look back and forth. So what we want to do is get rid of the layout. So let's just say, or the legend, show legend equals false. We had seen how to get rid of that before. Now we don't have the problem of having a legend, but we have the problem of we don't know what anything is. So we have to add back in something that tells me where this is. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a annotation. So there's a new method that we're going to introduce for a figure, fig.add annotation. And let's just go ahead and do the most basic thing that we can here. I'll say text, that's going to be what the annotation is. And let's say we wanted to label the income. And then I'm going to run this and we're going to see what we get. It doesn't look good. I've got this like income with like a little line. We call this an arrow. It's put in some random spot that I don't really want. And so let's go ahead and not have that for just a moment. So I'm just going to say cut, Control X for me. I'm going to rerun this so that we can see everything. And I'm going to say, well, where I really wanted this was over here, right? At 2017 and around 1.998. And so let's go ahead and fix that. So I want the X to be 2017 and the Y to be 0.199, something like that. All right, now when I rerun this, there's income kind of in this spot that I wanted it, 998, it looks like. We're gonna have better ways to do this in just a moment. So there's that. We have this like little line. That line's not doing us a lot of good right now. It's not, we don't really need it. We just want to put income next to the line. That line, like I said, is called an arrow. So we're going to say show arrow equals false. That's going to get rid of the arrow. The other problem we have is that this isn't quite aligning where I would like it to. It would be great if it was sort of like text left aligned and I could put it right where I want, and text maybe aligned right in the middle vertically. And so we can control that alignment using what's called the anchor. So X anchor, that tells us along the X, where is the point that we're exactly specifying this function or this annotation is going to be. And we want it to be on the left. And then the Y anchor would handle the vertical part. So Y anchor equals the middle. That's what we would like. And now you can see that income is there on the left. And oh yeah, the reason this isn't lining up is because it's 1.9 instead of 0.9. So let's do that. Now we have something that's kind of reasonable. It's still not perfect. We could adjust this ever so slightly if we wanted to. But one sort of annoyance so far is that we really wanted to label this line at the very last point in the data. And I was looking at the data and trying to remember what it was and then going up and typing it up here. There's a better way. We already have access to the data. When we made these plots, said X equals years. So let's just say X is years. And then we want the very last entry. That's where we would like to put this. And it turns out we can count backwards in Python. And so we say, let's take all the indices, right? Like if I look at the data that we have under view files, we've done this before. We would say this is the 0th index in that array, the first 1, 2, 3, we're numbering them up, but we can also just go backwards. And so I can say in the year, go -1, that goes to the end. And this would be -2, -3. So I don't even have to know what the data is now. I just know I want the last value. And then we're labeling income. So let's do the same thing for income. We're going to say use the income data and give me the last value of that. And that's where I would like my X and Y to be. And look at that. Now it's lined up pretty much perfectly immediately. All right. And then, as you might imagine, we can just like do this for the rest of these. There's more efficient ways to do this, but for right now, let's not worry about it. Housing and education. And then of course, this needs to be called housing and education. Now everything is directly labeled. I don't have a legend. And yeah, that does a pretty good job for us. There's more that we can do with these labels. You know, we could try to control their appearance so that like the words are red and match up with the red here. That would be a use of consistency in helping us make this connection between the labels and the lines. But we're going to worry about that when we worry a little bit more about how do we really control font and things like that in our figures. And that will be in the next module. For now, we're just working to be able to place annotations where we want them on this figure and be able to control some of the properties about them. So the last thing I would like to discuss when we think about these annotations is that arrow. So let's go back, and here we had show arrow equals false. Let's just set one of these to true so we can think about it. And there is education. Now, the arrow is kind of a line. And so you might expect that all the things we've been learning about lines apply to arrows. So I could say arrow width equals 5, and then I'll get a very thick arrow. I could say arrow color equals, well, okay, education, this I think we used light green. And so let's just go ahead and do that. And now we have an arrow that looks just like the data line. We could have arrow dash potentially. Let's see what happens. Dot, we know, is a property. And then we get an error. And so now we're not able to use arrow dash, but you can see that we have arrow head. Interesting. So let's scroll up and see if we can find that. Arrow color, arrow head, arrow side, arrow size, arrow width. Okay, and so you'll start to see that we've used width. We have this arrow head, sets the end annotation arrow head style. It's not telling us how to do it, but that's fine. We'll get there in just a second. And then it's saying we can set the size as well of the arrow head. So let's try those two things. All right, so we know we don't have arrow dash, but we have arrow head. It turns out that arrowhead is an enumerated property. It's not exactly useful for you, but we just give it a number, and that number controls what it is. So 0 is none. If I go back up and I change this to 1, then we'll see I get that kind of arrow. If I go to 2, I get that kind of arrow. If I go to 3, I get that kind of arrow. 4. So I'm enumerating or running through a list of arrows that just are numbered. If you really want to know what they are, you can ask the AI agent, hey, what are all the options for arrowheads? Or you can try to find this in Plotly in the documentation. Great. Something else that is in here is we have the ability to not only pick where the arrow ends, that's sort of the XY, but where it begins. And so AX, this would stand for anchor of the X, and we express this as an offset in pixels. So let's just go 10 and see what happens. You'll see that compared to where we used to be, it's shifted it to the right. And in fact, it shifted it 10 pixels. And we could do the same for AY, the anchor for the Y. If I said 10, you'll see it's moved it down by 10 pixels. If I wanted to have moved it up, I could have used minus 10 instead. All right, so what about we do something a little bit more drastic? How about like 100 pixels? And yeah, like minus 100 pixels. There we go. Now we're like standing far off and pointing at this. We could make it like a thinner line. We could give it like a more differenter arrowhead if we wanted. That's kind of like really small. Okay. Can't really see the arrowhead, but the last thing that we remember is we could have arrow size, and that controlled the position or the size of the arrowhead. And so what if we made this like big? Yeah, there you go. So there's direct control over what this arrowhead looks like. Great. The last thing that we saw was an option was arrow side, and arrow side is something like start and end. All right, so now we're putting the arrow pointing towards the anchor point. That's what happens when it's start. When it's end, it points back to where we normally would have expected it based off of the behavior we've seen so far. And I could have both by just joining them together with a plus. And now the arrow points both directions. Okay. So what we've done today, or in this video, is we've thought about how can we annotate plots, in particular in this case, to get rid of the legend. But this is something that might be useful for us generally if we have like a particular point that we wanted to call out. We now know how to put an annotation at a particular point. We know how to control the sort of appearance of the arrow part of this, whether we show it or not, and how we make it look. We haven't thought about the text yet, and that's something we'll think about in another video, how we control the appearance of text in Plotly. And then the last thing I want to remind you is that we've learned that we can use the indices of lists or arrays in order to select particular elements out and then use that to place where these annotations are. And we've learned that we can count backwards in this indexing. And so that's something that's fairly useful for us. Okay, so with that, that's all we have to do today. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.